All right, so let's take a look at parameterization of components. We already did some of that. We parameterize stateless components, right? We pass them as parameters, right? So let's take a look at that just again. So here we have a whiteboard, and in whiteboard, one of the things that we could pass around is data about what we want to render. Just like we did when we looked at the module list item. What do? In the module list, we use attribute to pass data down to the component, correct? Right? And then in the component, this would be a stateless component. We then extracted the element that we wanted, and then we just used this as a property that we were rendering. So similar, we can do the same thing in whiteboard. For instance, let's go to whiteboard, yeah, and in the index here in whiteboard, let's pass around the courses that we want to render. Okay, right. So for instance, we might create here a constant variable that says courses. That might be an array of courses, and you might have multiple courses. So you might have here title. This is CS 5200, and here might be title CS 5610 and whatnot. Yes? Okay? And what we might do here is that we could pass it as an attribute, so courses. Right, so not only can you pass static string, but you can pass also objects down to a component. Right? So in whiteboard, we might decide to, for instance, in these course card, instead of being something static like this, we would like to display, maybe iterate over the courses that we passed along, right? So how do we get a hold of that? So these properties that are being passed around like attributes, they're available here in the props, right? These props, like the objects and maps that we showed you earlier in stateless components, they're available through the props. So let's take a look at this. So for instance, we might say, let's alert here, props dot, and then what do we have here? Courses. So the props contains everything that we're being passed along. In this case, courses, with the name that we give it here in the attribute. So we say dot courses dot length, for instance. Notice that it says 2, right? Meaning that we have access to those 2 courses, and we know that the length of that is 2. Okay, so for instance, in here whiteboard, we might display here how many courses we have. How many courses we have. So for instance, we might display here. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the props as a global variable. Instead, we have access to this dot props. Right, this dot props is the original props that was passed on to us. It is now tied to the current instance of the object that we inhabit. Okay, so we have access to this dot props dot courses dot length. So we can display next to the whiteboard, we can display the 2 here. Make sense? Right? So I'm going to remove this alert. Okay, there we go. All right. Excellent. I'm going to move the module list down further because I want to play around with the course card here. All right. All right. So we have these courses here. One of the things that we'd like to do, since we know it's an array, right? We would like to maybe iterate over that array, right? And for instance, instead of having this hard-coded list of courses, we would like to iterate over them for every single course that we have in the object. So let's do that. So what we could do is we can either do it before the render and do a proper for loop, right? And build the course card as a concatenation, right? And then render it here. Or what you'll typically see instead is the following: is embedded right here, could be the iteration, right where we need it. Okay, So one way that we iterate, one of the more modern ways of iteration is to do a map. So we can say this dot props dot courses. Right, so we're going to map over that. We're going to iterate over that. And as we iterate, we want to concatenate. Right? We want to concatenate. So we want that the result of this is the concatenation of multiple things. And that's exactly what map does, right? Map iterates over a collection, right? And then it generates a concatenation of all the things that it iterated over. Right, so let's do that. So we can do a map. So we're mapping over that collection. And what map does is that it passes along the instance that it's iterating over, right? So let's do that. So as it iterates, it's going to it's going to call a function which has the following format. Right, this is the new format in ES6. It's a function, right? You could use the old way of doing it, an actual function, right? And this would be, course. And then here you could do a proper return, right? And whatever you return gets concatenated, right? So for instance, we could return here course, what is it? Course card. Notice that we have two. We have two course cards. And they're all the same, they're all identical, so that's a proper map, right? It's returning two of those that get concatenated. The modern way of doing it is instead using the less verbose course card, ES6 functions, right? So the syntax is the following, right? It takes the parameters and then whatever you want to execute here. Right, so let's do that. So this is going to iterate. The parameter is course that's being passed, and we're going to return the course card. So notice that those are equivalent. They do exactly the same thing, right? Just to validate that indeed this is actually working, let's pass as an argument here the title as course.title. Just to verify that indeed these are distinct course cards, right? So we're passing the title. In course card, in the props, I need the props, right? If the only way that I can have the props if I do a constructor, here are the props. Now in the title, here's the title right here. We can do a this.props.title, which is that's the property that's being passed to us, right? Right, so now if we go back, notice that we have CS5200 and CS5610. Okay, right. So that's working. We're being able to pass these things around. Now this syntax is still too verbose. It's still too verbose. Okay, remember that return. If this is the only thing we're doing, returning this, right? We have a more compact way of doing this, right? We can just say here parentheses. And parentheses here. All right, that's a little less verbose. We don't need to return; it's implied, right? And that still works. Okay. It's even still too verbose. In ES6, if you only have one argument, the parentheses is irrelevant. Right? The parentheses is irrelevant. There's only one. Why do I need a parentheses? Okay. In this case, I do need the parentheses, well, unfortunately, because I need two arguments, right? If we look at if we inspect this, you'll notice there's an error here, right? It's complaining. It's complaining about something. One of the things that it's complaining about is that you're generating all these components on the fly, and there is no distinct identity for the DOM for React to distinguish one component from another. Right, so it's preventing it from doing some optimizations. Right, the way React works is that whenever it's going to make a rendering on the DOM, it would like to make sure that it does the minimum amount of update to the DOM because writing to the DOM is very slow. Right, so what it'll do is that it has a virtual version of the DOM, and it has the real DOM. and what it'll do is it'll compare the DOMs and see what the differences are. And then it will only do the updates that are different, right? So that it makes sure that it doesn't touch anything that it doesn't have to touch. So the way of that optimization works is to be able to keep track, right, of every element in the real DOM compared to the virtual DOM, right? So one of the things that it wants to do for me to provide a unique identifier called a key. So it wants me to add here a key. Right? It wants me to add a unique identifier, which is fine. The map function provides that for me. As it iterates over the collection, it also provides me the first argument. It provides me the actual object as it's iterating. The second argument is the index. Right? Which one is it? Is it 0, 1, 2, 3? Which one is it in the original array? Right? So I can provide here the index, but now I have two arguments. Right? So I have to have a parentheses. Two more characters to type. So now that I have the index, I can use the index as a unique identifier for the key. Right? And so I'll put everything in a single line, different lines. So now the error goes away. Right? Now it's happy that it now it has a unique mapping between the virtual and the actual DOM. Everybody okay? Yes? All right, excellent. So that's all we really needed as an example of passing properties from our parent elements down to our children through properties. Right? Notice that this, obviously, when you're using a class, this is so much more verbose. Right? All these classes and parentheses everywhere and curly brackets and constructors and rendering and returns. Right? All that goes away, right, when you're using, a simple stateless class, right, where you're not maintaining any of this. The syntax is so much prettier, but obviously you can't maintain any state. Right? So we'll take a look at how to maintain state in a minute. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right, awesome.